Hello! Today I'm going to be reviewing the sophomore studio album by Icelandic singer Björk. This album is titled Post. It was released on June 13th, 1995. It is a critically acclaimed album of hers that has won her year-end lists for the 90s, for also the entire decade. It's been considered one of the best albums by Rolling Stone of all time. It's like in their top 200 list. So this album has received a lot of acclaim, and it was also the album that made her rise to her peak of media scrutiny and interest. There at this point was a lot of tabloid focus and a lot of critical and media focus from MTV, from TV shows. All of these things eyed on Björk. And this was a really interesting time for her. Unfortunately, it did kind of backfire, as the whole promotion that she did for this tour for the Post album was so draining, the media influence, the reporters, that she had that incident at that Bangkok airport where someone was interviewing her son. And this also caused her to sort of retreat away to Spain to record her next album, Homogenic. But all that aside, Post is a very interesting album for her. It's a crossroads in her musical career. Of course, this is still her branding herself. She's just moved to England after living in Iceland for so long, being a part of, more indie rock bands like the Sugar Cubes and Kukl. And so she's finally finding her footing in a more sort of indie electronica dance hip-hop scene. She's getting really interested in club house dance music in London in the 90s. This is a sound that bridged with ambient trip-hop and a lot of other things made popular by artists like Aphex Twin, and this is sort of where Massive Attack has started to be kind of influenced. These are sort of where the groundings of this album is formed. She actually recorded some of these songs in the Bahamas, which is quite a different landscape from Iceland. But then she came back and reworked these. A lot of them were worked with, she co-produced with Nelly Hopper, who she worked with on Debut, along with Graham Massey and several others, Tricky, who is a hip-hop producer. She had a relationship with him briefly. There's a lot of different people that she collaborated with on this record, and including Sjón, the Icelandic poet that she later collaborates with for songwriting all of her albums down the road. The title Post not only means this is after she moved to London, and of course this is after her debut album. These are sort of two sister albums that sort of is before and after, but it also references the fact that she would write a lot back home in the Post, mail things to her family and friends back in Reykjavik. She grew up in a smaller community and she always felt like she wanted to keep in touch. This was a new thing for her, so she really did use mail to that advantage and that importance of constantly being in contact. And she also dressed up in an outfit that is quite iconic for the album cover that is inspired by the stamps and envelopes of the British Royal Mail Service. It's quite an interesting, unique idea for an album cover. The background is inspired by all these city lights and signs and also postcards and stamps from all over the world, and she makes it this sort of poppy, vibrant kind of scene and color. And this album is a lot about that. It is very extroverted for a Björk record, like Debut was, but also it has its very intimate moments. This is an album that Björk has stated is a lot about independence and a lot about fearlessness and sort of this unknowing of where you're going next, and this sort of head first of taking bravery and risk-taking that comes from trying new things. She also described it as very schizophrenic. So the album is all different types of music. It's been referred to as genre roulette by some publication, I can't remember which. And I thought that was a very apt title because it's definitely a ton of different genres of ambient pop, avant-garde pop, like some people have called it, industrial, experimental, electronica, folktronica, all of these genres that people always constantly try to place on Björk, but she has always stated, of course, that she is her own genre, and her voice is very unique, and it cannot be compared to others, although Kate Bush does come to mind as someone who would have probably had a huge influence on her in creating stuff like this. So let's get into this. We have Army of Me, which was the lead single released from this album in 1995. This is her most industrial song that she has ever released, and it is one of her most interesting. It's constructed like a pop song, and it is very angsty and full of that, you know, punk aesthetic. But at the same time, and maybe this is just me, but there's something I find very calming about the way she delivers the vocals on this song. The grinding sort of experimental industrial sounds are not that loud in your ears. They're a little bit in the background. And so while that's all rumbling, she sort of sings in this very kind of off-putting, but also very smooth delivery of singing about someone who she can't understand why that person is not standing up for themselves. This song has been said to be about by her brother. She felt as though he needed to stand up for himself for once, and taking that into her own life and her own understanding. Because I always viewed this as being about, you know, inside your head, parts of you that want to rebel against where your higher self wants to go, and you're kind of just talking about, like, if you complain once more, you'll meet an army of me. Well, that means that I've got, like, just like I have, you know, antibodies to attack a cell in my body that's going to cause sickness, I have lots of good parts of me that are going to attack that negative thought or that negative energy that intruded into me, that thought of, I don't really want to do this, or I don't feel like doing anything, you know, I just want to, you know, sleep all day. It's like something you need to lift yourself up. So it asserts itself, which is something that is not unique to Björk's subject matter, but the delivery is just quite unique. And I think the landscape that is produced from this song is quite exquisite. It's definitely a highlight on this record, which then crashes down into the smooth burner hyperballad. This is, you know, unlike the title might imply, this is not a hyper song. This is a ballad, though, and this is probably actually more heart-wrenching than the sonic structure of it may imply. This song is very dark. She's basically singing about going to a cliff edge and throwing things off, like car parts, bottles, and cutlery. I love how she sings cutlery. You can really hear her British accent at this time when she was moving to London. You can start to hear more of that influence, and even to this day, she still has quite a strong, very Icelandic accent, but with hints of that London British accent in there as well. And she imagines what her body would sound like and look like falling onto those rocks down below. She sings, she does all of this every day like a routine before her partner even wakes up, so that she can feel freed from all the darkness and weightness and depression that possibly arises from this relationship. It's not exactly a healthy relationship here, but it basically leaves you thinking she can do this every single day and is okay, because this is sort of her way of therapeutically exercising all of this. And then she goes back to her husband and everything is fine until the next morning. Yeah, I mean, it just is this cycle. And I think many of us can relate, of course, because relationships are never perfect and pretty in all parts. And there always are ways in which we always envision things that we have to do, whether we like it or not, that we don't want to necessarily tell people. Well, this song tells you. It's deeply personal. And it's almost frightening the first time you listen to it, because you're like, oh my God, she's singing about suicide so casually. Well, you know, you have to understand Björk. You know, she's not literally always going there, but she's definitely toying around and experimenting with all of these different ideas about how to cope with something that is difficult, that many people have to face. And she's putting it all on the table. She's not holding anything back, and I appreciate that. The music video is very trippy. It shows her projected onto herself as if she's hypnotically entranced. And of course, it was directed by Michel Gondry, who this is the first time she really goes harder into her music video catalog and creates 6 amazing music videos for this album, almost all of them directed by Michel, except for possibly Maybe. That was directed by, ironically, the person that song was actually about. And I thought that was kind of interesting. We have the modern things. This song is about how industry and technology is always buried in the earth. And the dinosaurs were, you know, just as close to it as we are. It just was being waited to be discovered. It's a very interesting philosophical and existential sort of statement that makes a lot of sense. It was just waiting for us to play catch up. The metals and the technology was always there. We just didn't know how to put it together. She sings this in a much more hushed and refined, a little bit more of a raspy and raw kind of approach. This is not more of a refined and polished pop song that she's presenting. This song is very sparse and parsed out. And it sort of has this recorder, you know how like records would skip at the end. Well, she does that while she's sort of riffing in gibberish, which she loves to do. Sometimes she does sing a little bit in Icelandic in parts of these songs, but most of this song does sound a lot like gibberish. There's some parts of it that sound like words that don't make any sense, and I always hear those words when I listen to the song, and it's always a little funny to me, and it makes me laugh just a little bit, but it's just because Björk's delivery is so unique, and to the casual listener who's used to pop music, they probably would find it a little funny or a little strange. And she does sort of poke fun at herself a little bit in that respect, but it's just experimental. You have to understand that sort of experimental music. And so once you look past that, it's more just like this sort of interesting sonic and also vocal kind of technique, and it just sort of outros out the song. The melody is not very strong on this song, I will say, and for that, it does make it kind of my least favorite song on the album. It's just not very, like, sonically memorable, but the lyrics are quite interesting. It's oh so quiet. Now, this is not written by Björk as I once thought. Oh, I used to think she would compose a song like this. No, of course not. This was the last song that was composed for the album, and it is by a German someone, I forget who, but this woman Betty Hutton, made this song quite popularized when she performed it in 1951. It has that Broadway aesthetic. It's very broad and open. And then, of course, she sings it's oh so quiet. Shh, shh. It's so infectious. And it was one of her most successful pop songs in the US and the UK and in Europe. And it is so different from everything else that she's ever made. It has lots of jazz backings. It reminds you of like a Chicago show tune. And it is sexy and it's daring and it's also introverted at the same time. And that's what the song is about. You know, that pent-up frustration between two lovers who they're forced to tiptoe around each other because they're both shy and quiet. And they don't know how to break that, you know, break through to each other. But when they do, it's cacophonous and it's orgasmic and it's amazing. And then everything goes back to normal. And so we have that, you know, horn section just carry us through very casually, just like a Mary Poppins type song. I always find it so casually fun to listen to, but of course, and the music video is so fun. It's more of a choreographed set, which Björk almost never does. I mean, the fact that Björk is doing choreography with a group, this is unheard of. So this song is much more performative, it's much more stage ready, and it's different from everything else she's done. But hey, she included it to just, as she said, make the album as schizophrenic as possible so that people could scratch their heads even more. That's how cool and crazy Björk is. Enjoy is another really dark, industrial, electronic, sort of house-inspired song. This is about that sort of hedonistic urge that Björk has that she very unapologetically talks about. You know, this is sex without touching. I want to enjoy all of you. I wish simplicity. I wish I only loved you. I wish I only had to look and I didn't have to touch. I wish I'd only smelled this, but I didn't have to taste. How can I ignore this is sex without touching? I'm going to explore. I'm only into this to enjoy. It's this surrender to your pleasures. I'm better than this, but I'm going to go the lower route this time. And it's just a romp. It's just unapologetic. It has a horn breakdown that has a little bit of jazz influence. And it does feel a little bit cabaret. It does feel a little bit grungy New York City. And I like that about it. Because it's unique for her, but it suits her aesthetic. It's her punk aesthetic for this album. You've Been Flirting Again is this interlude song where she has this soft swan-like delivery. It reminds me a lot about Like Someone in Love. It kind of serves the same purpose as that song does in Debut, when you've sort of left the club and you're out in the street by yourself and you're feeling suddenly very reflective and introspective. So she has this beautiful orchestral backing to just sort of reflecting on this sort of night out that she just had. Did she go too far? Oh, you've been flirting again. I don't understand to all that extent what this song is about, but it's reassuring yourself. How you reacted, it was right. All that she meant, and of course she's singing about third person, like if she's singing about herself, which is kind of interesting. all that she meant was good, give her some space, give her some time. This will all be okay. And it has that sort of, oh, after the storm, that sort of revelatory, oh, everything is going to be all right again. And then it has this very interesting key change that transitions into the next song, Isabel, which is my favorite song on this album and one of my favorite Björk songs. Isabel is a statement song that is very autobiographical, but it's also very fictionalized at the same time. Björk is, personifying herself as this other character that she creates named Isabel, who lived off in the forest and then who came to the city and realized the city was too much, and they viewed her as too intellectual and too reclusive, and they didn't like her, so she decided to go back to the forest, and she decided to communicate them ideas that she had via these moths. It's very unique, and that music video explains this much better. The music video is actually filmed in Wales, in Llangollen, and it was shot, of course, by Michelle Gondry, and it's, again, one of my favorite music videos of hers. And there's just something about this song. It has what someone described as a slow, steady march through, like, a sand desert. There's something persistent about this song. It's actually quite long, and the verses are stretched out quite long. The stanzas are stretched out. It has very appealing melody. It feels a little bit soundtrack, and it feels a little cinematic, as it should, as it has that opening, which feels a bit like the opening to a film from the 40s or 30s. And like you're telling a story about, like, this person who lives off in the woods. Let me tell you about her. And the horns are beautiful for that. And then, of course, the orchestral elements that swell and flow are so almost Eastern influenced. And that's why I think some people kind of hint at that sort of idea. But this was actually inspired a lot by, like, South American tales and South American culture, from what Björk has said herself. And it's about that sort of blending of nature and technology and understanding how someone could understand those two in their own framework of their own understanding of themselves, if that makes any sense. Gabriel Garcia Marquez was a South American writer that inspired this song predominantly. And it discusses the duality between reason and emotions, between intuition and intellect. In Iceland, this is a prominent issue. I mean, not an issue, but it's something that she would be forced to think a lot, because Iceland is in such a natural world. It's very primal, and at the same time, they're very advanced, for the 20th century or now 21st century. Everyone has computers. The tech industry is huge. It's a very interesting conflating what should be juxtapositioning could actually work together, and that's what this song is trying to address. There's also something about this song that makes me think about water and how it flows. And that's where I get this song is like a river. It just feels, and it feels very feminine, and it feels very feminist. And I will always come back to this song as such a powerful statement piece of hers that is also so beautifully composed. In a heart full of dust lived a creature called lust. Very, very beautiful, poetic, though you could hear that Sion, her future collaborator, is also working with her here, and the influences that she's drawing from all these other writers. She's really crafting her songwriting skills here. So Possibly Maybe is definitely her most sexually explicit song. She sings about loving his lava and volcanoes and eruptions. We know where this is all going. The music video, it hits it over the head a little bit, but it's also meant to be erotic. It's very artfully done. And like I said, this was inspired by a quick relationship that she had, and the guy that she had this relationship with actually filmed the music video for it, which is quite awkward. But hey, apparently they both revealed that we learned some great stuff to use for our artistic material here. So it's smooth. It's a soft, introspective song, but some people call it like ambient dub. I do get the ambient part because it is at the same time electronic. And again, I do think a lot about like musicals and musical theater and jazz. And again, I hear all those influences. I'm not a huge fan of that genre of music, but Björk just subtly introduces it, and I don't mind it. The best line, which I want to put in my like tagline on like any bio about me, is, as much as I definitely enjoy solitude, I wouldn't mind perhaps spending a little time with you. Sometimes. So it's the perfect way to describe an introvert, who is so longing for someone at some times, but don't get me wrong, I don't want you around all the time. I still want my solitude. I still want my space. But there's that sort of flirtatious wink about this song. It's like, well, but you know, I may be a shy girl, but there's something about you that you make the lioness roar. And like I said, it's pure sex. She sings about, I'm wearing lipstick again since I've dated you. I've discovered things about herself. Maybe she's pleasuring herself. It's been rumored that she recorded this song completely naked in the studio. Wouldn't be surprised. Very, very interesting. Again, a nice softer moment for the album, because the next song, I Miss You, is probably one of her most energetic songs she's ever recorded, with strong Afro-Cuban and Latin influences. I Miss You is this tour de force of a jazz sort of inspired Latin song. It's really something. The music video, I will say, is a bit too much for me. It's involved cartoons, and there's like chickens exploding. Yeah, it's a bit too much. This was when I was getting into Björk still, and I was like, yeah, I heard some people say she was a little out there. Well, this is definitely going in that direction. But the song I kind of just disassociate from the music video. It's art. I appreciate it for what it is. It's a little too out there for my taste. But I Miss You is just this second guessing. It's frustration about waiting for someone. I can't stand the wait. I want to meet you. I want to be close to you again. And you can almost hear her in frustration thrashing about as these sort of African drums break down in the midsection towards the bridge. And she just lets go vocally. She growls, she rasps, she basically like ends it on that sort of note where you just fall to the floor afterwards, because she sounds like a balloon that is losing air and it's floating up into the ceiling. You know that sound, like helium exiting a balloon really fast? She definitely tries to mimic that sound as the song ends, and it kind of has that like, this was a really sudden this moment of ecstasy, and then it all ends just like that. Cover Me is a song that also interested me from the get-go, because this is probably the one song that I think is the most forward-facing on this album. This is definitely a good intro to where she goes more in Homogenic and Vespertine and Medulla. This is sort of signaling the like unknown that she's traipsing around. And then I think when she recorded it, it was meant to be more playful and innocent and not so serious and literal. It was actually recorded in a cave in the Bahamas, which is so interesting. The sound is so spacious and outdoors feeling, and it's misty, and those harps are so alluring and mystical. And she really is, I mean, I interpret it as a lot more serious, like, I'm going hunting for mysteries. This is a signal to Hunter, you know, the song that leads you into Homogenic. Because, you know, her later albums are a lot more esoterically focused than her first two, which are a lot more pop, mainstream focused, city life, relationships. And so this is sort of signaling her interest in going down the less traveled path. And I think it's a very aptly placed song to fit on the album. We then end with Headphones. This is an ode to sound, like that headphone, insular, one-on-one relationship that you have with music that I think anyone who loves music can truly appreciate. You know, there are sounds in this song that you can only hear via headphones, not through stereo. And it's sparse as anything, and it's so relaxing. Some people have called it like a little bit like her eyelids are half open and she's like almost asleep. It does have a little bit of that delivery. It almost sounds like she's falling asleep as she's singing it, but it doesn't sound lazy. It sounds blissful, and it's meant to sound like that. This was inspired by Graham Massey. He would send her cassettes with like all of these songs on them, and she would just fall in love with that. She loved receiving all of these like little packages of music from him. So she wrote this as sort of like a thank you letter to him. And it ties in a little bit to the whole Post theme. It's a love letter to sound, as she has stated, and the frequencies of it and the vibrations. You know, I love this resonance. Her voice is so milky, smooth, and soft and delicate. And it's a unique thing to hear from her voice at a lot of times, especially in like, well, she does get really soft on the Cocoon in Vespertine, but otherwise she does like to make her voice more distinct. And songs like this don't necessarily, and she's still developing her voice, don't make her sound so unique and different. But it's nice to see that reflection, and her to be so soft and to the microphone is a bit of a fresh air. All in all, Post is just one roller coaster of a record. It made this huge statement in the alternative indie market for also the pop scene as well. It's been considered one of the best art pop albums of the 90s. It's something that you can tell has been this big, it's called Post, but a lot of people say it's actually pre a lot of what it was ushering in. And so it was this very out there sort of presentation morphed into a package of a little bit more of a standardized pop album. And this is sort of a newer thing. You know, you've had David Bowie do this before and some other artists, but this is something that becomes more prominent in other artists later on. And a lot due to artists like Björk for experimenting with the pop package being formally reshifted and molded to be something completely unique and experimental and very memorable. Like I said, almost all of these songs, except perhaps the modern things, and maybe You've Been Flirting Again, because those two songs are a little bit more like simplistic in melody and sound and production, though they're still beautiful, are very memorable, all of the others, and I highly recommend this album. It's listed as a lot of Björk fans, if not favorite album, or one of their favorite albums. And as I said, it's the only album to be listed by Rolling Stone in their 200 best albums of all time. I would disagree. I would say Homogenic and Vespertine, for me personally, especially Homogenic, are a little bit stronger than Post because I feel like she finds her footing more in those albums, especially Homogenic. But again, that's my own personal preference. Let me know in the comments your experiences and reactions to this album, what your favorite songs are. I have only one more Björk album to review. Well, one like standard album. I know she has Telegram and she has Drawing Restraint and the Selma songs. I'm going to go through do a video where I talk about all of her non-album songs, which includes all her B-sides and bonus singles like Play Dead and It's in Our Hands, Family Tree, Generous Palm Stroke. There's all of those songs, Natura. I will go through and make a video where I talk about my favorites of those, and I'll talk about almost all of them. So that'll be separate, but I need to do debut first. So I've reviewed every single other Björk album, and they will be all linked in my description, but also I will link the playlist as well, so then you can just like see them all, because that's a lot of links. And like I said, I will be doing debut hopefully within the next month or so, so that'll be all of my Björk reviews. I'll be all caught up. And I hope I'm pronouncing her name properly. I'm really trying not to say Björk like pork. I've been getting, you know, people saying that, and I always pronounced it like that. It's just how I've always heard Western media address her. But in Iceland, it would be pronounced more like Björk with the rolled R and all of those things. And I don't have an Icelandic accent, so I don't know. I'm trying. I don't want to be too ignorant on that. So I hope I'm doing okay with that. And like I said, I hope you enjoyed this review. Please subscribe and give this a thumbs up if you did. And I hope to see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching. Have a wonderful day. Bye.